Hello, everybody. Getting my camera set up here. Welcome to another class here with Magoosh. I'm Elliot, the IELTS teacher at Magoosh. Welcoming all of you. I see lots of students who come to classes before. I see some new names, I think. So welcome to all of you. We're also streaming this out there on YouTube. So all of you folks there on YouTube, you're live with us as well. And you can look in on what we're doing here in our classes here at Magoosh. So welcome. Excited to get into this stuff with you today. I'm going to start recording for you Magoosh students on the Zoom call so that later today I can put this lesson on your dashboard. So one moment, let me get this going. There we go. All right. So we're going to get started here today. I'm excited to get into this topic. It's one that I've been talking to many of you about in our conversation club that we have on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We've been spending time together practicing speaking questions. And we have been practicing also part 2 of the speaking test, and that's what we're going to focus on today. In Conversation Club, if you haven't been there yet, it's a chance for Magoosh students to pair with each other to answer speaking questions that are similar to the ones on the IELTS speaking test. And then I give a little feedback to some volunteers who give examples. So it's a class we run 3 times a week, and you should definitely come. If you haven't been there yet, I think it's you can ask anyone who goes regularly. I think it's a great way to meet other people, to practice, and to practice specifically for the IELTS speaking test. So we're going to go into more depth today about one very specific part of the test, which is the second part of the test, the part 2, and that is your monologue section. Okay, and so we're focusing on that. I will, of course, if you've got other questions about the speaking test, we can talk about those as well. Okay, so anyway, we'll have time. I think we'll have time to get through all of this stuff here today. And so I'm excited to dig in. So if you're ready, later in the class, I'm going to invite, and at any time, I'm going to invite if you have questions or if you have if there are going to be a couple of activities where you can participate here today, please use the chat feature. So writing your answers in the chat will be the best way to do it. I think in these classes, when we unmute ourselves, sometimes it causes some issues. So I'd like to avoid that. So I hope you participate later on, but let's do it in the chat with each other. I'm watching this now. Yes, so let's get started here. I'm looking at the chat right now, and I see a question in here. Yeah, we are live stream. These days, we've been live streaming our classes out on YouTube. Just these Tuesday and Thursday classes, just so people can look in and see what's going on with the classes, what you all are up to here at Magoosh, you Magoosh students. So they're out there looking in, checking it out. So let's get started here. We're going to dig in today with part 2. Now, as always, I don't want to assume, well, I assume that we have different levels of awareness about the IELTS test out there. I know many of you have been studying for a while. Maybe you've taken the test already, and so you've got experience there. We also have some newer students, some students who haven't maybe jumped into their lessons yet or don't know much about the test. So let's start at the beginning. We'll go quickly here with some review of some basic things about part 2 of the speaking test, and then we'll dig in. Okay, yeah, okay, good. I see some folks commenting that they're new. Okay, so we'll start out here with the basic information and then we'll get more detailed as we go. All right, so let's talk about this. Part 2. Now we're focusing on part 2 because it's a special section of the test, okay? As you're probably aware, part 1 of the test is, and part 3, are basically like a conversation between you and the interviewer. So you're going to be, if you're in a test center where they are doing the speaking test live, in person, which is in some places in the world, they are doing that. You'll be in a room with somebody who's going to ask you questions. You're there for the test lasts about 11 to 15 minutes. The length depends a little bit on a few factors. And in part one of the test, your interviewer is going to sit down and ask you some questions, okay? They're going to be related to a few basic topics. Part one is mostly about sort of personal questions or small talk questions about the weather, about where you grew up, about your work, about what you study, things that are really basic topics of conversation. Part three, at the end of the test, will be another conversation, but there the questions get a little more complicated. I think we'll talk about that a little later in the lesson after we get through our discussion of part two. So both of those are sort of conversational sections with your interviewer. But part two is different. Part two is where you are going to give a short speech, okay? And this speech, it's called the long turn. You look up, I've got my notes here. I put all the points here on one page, but I'm on this first point here. It's called the long turn. Because you are supposed to give a lengthy answer, at least more lengthy than other parts of the test, okay? It's a short speech that you have to give, and they're going to give you a topic, actually a few questions related to a topic, okay? And you are going to have to give you're gonna have 1 minute to prepare an answer based on those questions, and then you're gonna have 1 to 2 minutes to speak on that topic, okay? So all of this, as I just mentioned, is based on a topic card, and that every time the topic card has 3 parts, okay? So we're gonna look at those 3 parts today. And the topics on the topic card that you have to talk about will be similar to the kinds of things you have to discuss on parts 1 and 3 of the test. So it's nothing wildly different. It's similar kinds of topics, but the way you have to answer is so different compared to the other parts of the test, all right? So why focus on this? Why are we gonna spend 1 hour and 15 minutes on this topic? Well, the reason why is because this is a part of the test where your preparation and your strategy and your approach to this part of the test can really, really, really pay off in a better score, okay? The more you understand how to answer questions and the more you practice part 2 skills that we're going to talk about today, the better you will do on this part of the test. And this is a really important thing because on the first part of the test, the questions tend to be a little easier. Students perform pretty well on these kinds of questions that they're used to answering frequently about themselves, about their families. As we talked about, these kinds of small talk questions about the weather, you've been learning about these concepts and the language related to these topics probably since you first started learning English, okay? But then things get a little harder, and part 2 steps up the difficulty just a little bit. The task is more complex. And so this is the part of the test where things begin to become a little more difficult. And so you want to be prepared as much as possible. And there's a lot you can do to prepare. So that's what we're going to focus on today, how to prepare for this part of the test, okay? So let's get into this a little bit. So again, helping, especially all of you out there who are pretty new to part 2 of the test. And part 2, you're going to get a topic card. You're actually, if you're in person with your interviewer, you are going to receive a paper that has your topic questions on it, okay? This is a piece of paper, by the way, you can write notes on it, okay? During the 1 minute you have to prepare. This paper is yours. You're not going to have to give it back during your speech. You can have it there during your speech to use as a prompt, as prompts for what you're going to talk about, okay? So you'll receive that card. Some of you out there these days may have to take the your interview on a video call. That's happening these days for some people. Okay, in that case, your topic card is going to appear on the screen for you, and you can take notes on some paper, but you won't have a physical topic card obviously handed to you by anyone. It's just going to be something you respond to on a screen. So it's just a little bit different, and that's happening obviously because of coronavirus. Okay, but on this card, there's going to always be a few things, a few features that you can expect to see on the card. Feature number one is a topic introduction. Okay, they're going to introduce what the very basic topic is that you're supposed to talk about. And they usually announce this. They will announce this topic to you when they give you your card. Okay, your interviewer is going to say something like, okay, I would like for you to talk about a teacher that was very influential to you. Okay, that's the topic introduction. And then they'll say you have 1 minute to prepare an answer, and you will speak for 1 to 2 minutes. And your time starts now, okay? And so then you'll have 1 minute to prepare your answer, okay? So they're going to tell you about the basic topic that you're going to talk about, and that's going to be listed on your card, okay? We're gonna look at a few sample cards in just a moment, just to get familiarity with what this looks like. But that's the first thing to see. Feature two will be detailed points, okay? And so these are what we call bullet points, okay? And bullet points here, I'll just quickly advance. We'll look at this in more detail in a moment, but these black circles are called bullets, okay? So if you're not familiar with that term bullet point, these are bullet point questions that that you need to respond to, or prompts that you need to respond to. Okay, these are things that you must include, information you must include in your response. Recently, and I'm emphasizing that because recently in Conversation Club, I've had questions from students about whether or not it's actually necessary to include the information from the bullet points in their response. And I don't know where it's coming from that you may not need to include that information, but I want to say very clearly to all of you out here, you must include the points that they put on that card in your response, okay? They are important to include in order to satisfy the requirements of the task, and that's what they're looking for. So these are points you must add in your 1 to 2 minute speech that you're going to give, all right? So that's feature number two, these bullet points. And then feature number three is the discussion prompt, okay? This is a prompt that is going to let you know what you are supposed to discuss at length. And for this one, this discussion prompt tells you how you are supposed to respond, okay? So they will say things like, explain. So my topic a moment ago, a teacher that was influential to you or memorable to you. We talked about a question like that in Conversation Club a couple days ago. So for that one, they might say something like, explain why the teacher was so influential or the teacher was so memorable, okay? They're gonna tell you that you need to, in that case, provide reasons why the teacher was so influential or memorable, okay? They're gonna give you some idea about how they want you to respond in this last part, okay? So these are the three features you can expect to see on any IELTS Part 2 speech topic card that you're going to receive, okay? So I'm going fast here, but I'll pause in just a moment if we have questions for anybody who needs me to slow down or back up a little bit. But let's just look at this now with some filled out example of a topic card, okay? So feature number one, topic introduction. So describe your dream job, okay? So your interviewer gives you your card and says, okay, I'd like for you to describe your dream job. You have 1 minute to prepare an answer and you will speak for 1 to 2 minutes. And then you receive a card. And on this card, okay, here are the feature number two, the bullet point prompts. Okay, they're gonna say, you need to talk about what the job is, the job requirements, and the activities that are done on the job. Okay, so these are points that you must include in the speech that you provide, all right? And then they say, and then explain why this job is your dream job. And so you have to give reasons why the job is your dream job, all right? So this is a filled out kind of example of these 3 features and what they might look like on a sample kind of topic card. Okay, now I see some questions coming in. That's great. Oh, Aslam, sorry, it was a direct message, but one of your classmates says that this was an actual question that was asked to the student on their actual test, on their IELTS exam. Okay, so yeah, this is a kind of thing that you would, you'd never know exactly what they're going to ask you on the speaking test, but we can make good guesses about the kinds of topics that are going to be there because they stay within a certain realm typically. So yeah, that's great. That's great that this is a question you've seen before. I see another question from Srividya. For this type of question, is it mandatory that we need to talk only about one teacher, or can we talk about 2 teachers and also 2 teachers who influenced us? Yeah, good question. So Srividya's question is about my example from a few minutes ago. Yeah, if the question says talk about a teacher who was really influential to you, you should talk about one teacher. Yeah, it's best to take the questions from IELTS to answer them as very literally and directly as you can. If they ask for reasons with an S at the end, you should try to think of more than one reason for something. And if they say teacher, singular, you should talk about one teacher. It's best to be very strict about that, because then you're getting in the habit of making sure you're answering questions very, very directly and literally. And that's usually, that's not usually, that is the best way to approach these questions. Yeah, that's a great question. Good question. Yeah, good. And a question from Komal. Yeah, good question, Komal. So the question is, are there rounding off questions after the cue card? So the question is, after you've given your speech, your 1 to 2 minute speech on the topics that you see on the card, Komal is asking about, are there then more questions that you have to answer? They're called rounding off questions. And the answer is yes. They almost always, I think they always have at least 1 or 2 questions immediately after you give your speech to sort of ask you some follow-up questions, just a question for some additional detail. That's where you're getting back into the conversational part of the interview. It's sort of the little segue or the transition from part 2 to part 3. You get a few rounding off questions. Those are not part of your speech. You can't really prepare for them. After your speech is done, they're just going to ask you for a little more detail about something that you said. So you can, yes, you can expect to get those, but they are not going to be on the topic card, and you can't really predict exactly what they're going to ask you to elaborate on. And okay, and so yes, we can talk about that later when we're thinking about actually looking at some speeches, and then we can think about what would be some possible follow-up questions or rounding off questions that you might see. Yeah, okay. Good. Okay, and let's see, looking there at Raphael, in this case, it would be interesting to talk about more than one job if I have different plans, B, C, and D, regarding my career. Okay, yeah, so yeah, so Raphael's question is, yeah, so could you, in this question, talk about more than one dream job? Yeah, I think Raphael's idea could work because he suggested there you could talk about your career, and a career is more broad, right? A job is like the job you do day to day, and your career is like where you're hoping to go. So if you mention that, yeah, my dream career is to be a CEO of a company or something like that, and I would like to start my own business someday. And then you could talk about the different jobs that might play into that kind of career trajectory, sure, that would make sense. I would focus on a single answer though. So you could talk about sort of the longer career, or you could talk about a single job that you would like to have. And I think actually in the end, both of them might actually be a little similar answer there. So yeah, I think that's possible there. Just focusing on one thing here though, that relates to your career or your job would be a smart plan, because you don't want your answer to get confused or complicated with multiple jobs that you're trying to describe in a very short amount of time. Yeah, good. Okay, good questions, everybody. All right, so let's take a look here. Let's see, I forget what's my next slide. Okay, let's take a look at some sample cards. Okay, and we're not gonna, later in this lesson, we're gonna go into, we're gonna look at some example responses. So I don't wanna go into too much depth here, thinking through how to respond to each of these. I just want to provide a few examples for you. And then in a moment, we will go into depth into first, we're going to analyze a response that's pretty good, but has some issues. We're going to look at how to take notes and how to organize responses. And then we'll look at a good corrected sample response after we go through those points here. Okay, so let's take a quick look at some sample cards and just think through the kinds of things we would need to do to respond to these. All right, here's one. Describe a place you enjoy going to in your hometown. You should address whether you go there with others or alone, how often you go there, and what you do there. Okay, and explain why you enjoy going to this place. All right, notice a couple of things. We're going to talk about this in a moment here on when we think about how to prepare answers and plan for answers during the 1 minute you have to prepare. Okay, just noticing the questions as we go from bullet point 1 down to bullet point 3. The questions often get just slightly more complex. Okay, and often this first bullet point is one that you can respond to very quickly without very much detail at all. Okay, we're going to look at that in a moment. As we go down here though, notice how, okay, so whether you go there with others or alone, right? You could imagine answering, this is a place I go to by myself mostly, right? And that would be sufficient. You don't need to say more about that bullet point. You've already satisfied that requirement. But as we get down further let's look at the third bullet point, what you do there. Okay, so here's where, possibly the answers are going to ask you to provide just maybe a little more detail, or an example, right? So we're going to look at that in some of these sample questions that we see, that the questions tend to get a little more complex. And then this last part here is the most complex, okay, right? Answering why you like going to this place. This would require some more detailed explanation, okay? So just notice that for now. We're going to talk about strategy and note-taking as we go, but just pointing out how things tend to require a little more lengthy answers as we go. Here's another one. Describe an important tradition in your family. You should address what the tradition is. Okay, so naming the tradition, that's pretty quick and easy. How it's celebrated. Oh, okay, what do you have to do for this tradition? Is it like, we have a tradition in my family, perhaps you're aware of American Thanksgiving, right? Thanksgiving is a holiday that's a important tradition in my family. Okay, so I could name that for the first bullet point, but then if I say how it's celebrated, okay, now I've got to talk about a little bit about, well, we have a big meal, family travels from all over to come, we eat particular foods. Okay, you could mention a couple of details quickly about these. When it's celebrated, all right, so that's a shorter answer, but the second bullet point in particular might require just a little more detail. Why the tradition is important in your family, oh boy, okay, now I have to give a more in-depth answer, right? And so that's what we're going to be looking at. All right, so the question is, how much detail should you plan on giving with your answer? Whoops, excuse me. Yeah, okay, good. All right, so how much detail? So we've been looking at these sample cards and thinking through what's appropriate and how much should you say. about each of these different parts of the card, okay? And this is going to lead us directly into our discussion on strategy and how to formulate your answer and what kinds of things you should be thinking about saying for each part, okay? All right, so first of all, we're going to start thinking about taking notes on these. Remember, you have 1 minute to respond, to think through how you want to respond to the question. Okay, you have exactly 1 minute. In fact, they're going to have a timer there, and they're going to stop and ask you to start speaking after the 1 minute is over. So that 1 minute goes really fast, right? If you haven't practiced that yet, you should do that. Try to take one of these cards and think through what you can plan in 1 minute. It goes really, really, really quickly. So we need to have a strategy about this, okay? All right, so your notes should be very short, right? You don't have time to write out full sentences. You don't have time to write out lots and lots of details in your 1 minute. You need to have a strategy to get the important information together on your note page and in your mind before the 1 minute is over and before you have to start speaking, okay? Also, you do not want to be reading anything during this time, okay? Reading is you don't want to be writing out full sentences in your notes, and don't practice that way. You don't want to do that. You also don't want to be reading exactly the language from the topic card either. You need to be paraphrasing language in your response, right? So reading from notes in a topic card is not what we want. We want notes that are going to be useful for our memory, to remind us of what we want to say, but not to give us the language exactly how we want to say it. We need to be thinking quickly during this time and using our notes to guide us, but not to give us specific language that we plan to say. Okay. Also, reading aloud is a different skill than speaking, and your interviewer will notice. If you are reading from a page, it's noticeable, and that can hurt your score a little bit if they notice you're reading. You need to be speaking from your mind during this part of the test. Okay. And anyway, 1 minute is not enough time to write out very much of a full speech. So anyway, it's kind of a lost. It's kind of something that would be impossible to do, to write out a complete speech anyway. So we need to practice speaking using our notes and using them to remind us of what we want to say. All right, so we want very little detail in our notes. You need to include enough detail, though, to fill out at least a minute of your speech. Remember, 1 minute is a minimum amount of time that you need to surpass in order to satisfy the requirements of the task, okay? When you're practicing, my advice is usually to try to practice getting enough information in there to last at least a minute and a half or a little bit more if possible. You want to be timing yourself, and you want to get a feeling for what it's like to talk for that amount of time. All right, so, but for the different parts of the card we're looking at, so point 1 on the topic card, as we talked about a moment ago, you're going to probably have very little to say. But points 2 and 3, the bullet points, you might start to think of some examples that you could add, and that could be worthwhile to put on your note card. I often recommend if you can avoid writing notes about the bullet points, remember you've got that card either on your screen or in your hands as you're responding. So if you can use those bullet points as notes that will remind you of what you want to say, maybe you don't even need to write down an idea for an example or a detail you want to say for those. But that would be, some students want to do that, and I think it can be a good idea that for those bullet points that require a little more information, right? Remember we saw here before, oops, wrong way. There we go. About the tradition example, right? So this one, what the tradition is, we don't need notes on that. Almost certainly we wouldn't need notes, but you might want to say something like, you know, write a little note off to the side saying like big meal or something like that, or whatever, something to remind you of what you want to say, possibly. But if you can avoid writing notes on that part of the test, on that part of the topic card, that's probably the best. The place where your notes are most important, though, is in the discussion feature. That's where you're supposed to come up with reasons why or an explanation that's more in depth. And so the best use of your 1 minute time is almost always to focus on that part of the topic card and to write some notes to remind you of what you want to say as your direct response to those questions. Okay. All right. So let's take a look here. Here's what I would like to, I've been talking for quite a while here. I'd like for us to think about a topic card on the screen. Oh, and I see some questions. I'm sorry. Let me take a look here before I move on. Let me answer your questions. So a question from Yurava, only keywords here. Yeah. Let's take a look at it in a second. Keywords can be good, and so we'll look at some examples of notes in just a moment. Okay, so I'll give you some clearer ideas of what kinds of things are appropriate there. But you know, notice here. I'm going to back up again. I apologize for going for backing up on all these slides so much, but notice how in this question, explain why the tradition is important to your family. Your notes should be keywords or topic ideas related to this why. Okay, you're gonna have, your goal should be to have at least 1 or 2 good reasons why the tradition is important in your speech. And so a good idea would be to have a keyword or some little phrase to remind you of the reasons why down here, because those are the main things you want to keep track of. And yes, if you can provide, if you can write a note to remind yourself of an example or 2 here, that could also be a good strategy. But your notes, as we're going to see in a moment, should focus on how you're going to directly respond to the questions on the card. Yeah. Okay. And is it, so Zainab, is it okay to talk without preparing anything? Sure. Yeah, if you feel that if you feel that you don't need notes, that your notes are getting in your way, and that's a real possibility for some people. Sometimes, you know, people get distracted. They feel like that, oh, I've got these notes, I need to follow them, and they might perform better just speaking from memory and answering the questions spontaneously. If that's you, that's completely fine, and you should explore that and see if you do better just putting the notes away completely and responding. I will say, though, that you still need to practice the structure and the format of responding to these questions that we are going to be talking about. So if you can respond in a clear way, in a way that satisfies the requirements of the task, and you can do it without notes, that is perfectly fine. Okay. So, but what we're talking about here should still pertain to you, because we're gonna give an idea of how to organize a response. And if that organization is something you can just do without notes, then I think it's great. Actually, I think a lot of folks need the notes, and the notes can be a helpful thing. But if you don't need them, don't use them. Yeah. Good question. Yeah, is it a good idea to use the 5W method in the response? Okay, so I think what you're talking about is the 5W to say who, what, where, when, why. Is that the idea, to use those WH questions? Yeah, okay, good. No, I don't think so, because here we go. So everybody knows what we're talking about. The as you all know, we've got the types of questions that you can be asked. And I think there's information out there online about people recommending that you should, when you get a question card, okay, so let's take back to our tradition one. When you get a question card, you got a topic, and you should answer who, what, where, when, why about the topic that's provided. Okay, I'm not an expert on exactly what the guidance is, because I don't recommend it myself, but I'm aware that there's some information like that out there. There's also information out there online talking about how you should talk about past, present, future about the topic in your responses here, and that might be a good way to organize information. Okay, again, I don't have a lot of expertise on the viewpoint, but I think I think it's problematic, both of those, because notice the questions, yes, okay, who, what, where, when, why, how. Okay, yes, those questions are represented here on your topic card, but not all of them are. We need to respond to the exact questions that are being asked here. And if you're answering something else, then you're going outside of the topic that you should be talking about. Okay, so yes, we're supposed to answer what the tradition is, how it's celebrated. Yes, we're supposed to focus on those questions, but these are the questions we're responding to. We're not using a framework where we're trying to answer all of those types of questions, especially the ones that are not asked of you, okay? And notice also, I just mentioned the past, present, future approach, where you're supposed to talk about something that happened in the past, something happening now, something that's happening in the future related to the topic. Those questions are not at all represented on this topic card, and actually most topic cards will not necessarily have opportunities to talk about the past, present, future. So if those are strategies you've heard about and you've been thinking about using, I would recommend against that. And in fact, in a moment, we're just going to talk about the approach we do recommend. Actually, we've already started getting into it, but I would be careful about those, because they're suggesting that you respond to things that are not actually on the topic card, and that will be a problem. Okay, does that make sense? Good questions though. Good. I'm glad. Keep bringing the questions like this. We want to clarify things like this, because some of those things, some of that information that's out there kind of takes you in the wrong direction, I think. And I think we need to have a better approach to responding to these cards. All right, we're going to think now together. We're going to get into some example responses here, and we're going to look at a question, and then I'm going to present a response to you that is pretty good, okay, but not great. All right, we're going to look at that first, and then we're going to think about how to organize a response that is better than the one we're going to see on the screen in just a moment. And then we're going to actually look at a sample response that is better and that is really well organized, to try to give you a sense of exactly what kinds of things and how you should organize your information as you go, right? So let's take a moment and look at this. And by the way, we've got some, as always, we've got some resources here. You're probably aware, especially all of you who come to Conversation Club, I've plugged this a lot. We've got some good resources for you on our blog related to IELTS speaking and about part 2 in particular. I'm going to share this document. I've linked to it on the slides here, but I'll just share it in the chat for everybody out there so you can see it. You can all have access to that. And this document has these questions are from a topic card that appear on this these speaking topics that we have. Many of the questions in this, if you come to Conversation Club, we've used many of these in Conversation Club, and Conversation Club, though, we're creating new questions as well. So they aren't all repeated. But even if you've seen some questions like this or similar questions, I think this is a great resource to practice part 1 and part 2 questions for all of you out there. Even if you've seen them before, if you've even responded to the specific questions, it can be beneficial to respond once, put it away, and then come back to it a week or 2 later and try to respond again. That repetition helps, because IELTS topics, there isn't an infinite number of IELTS topics that appear on the test. They tend to follow very specific sort of categories of information: family, experiences in school, your city where you live, or your job, or things like that. So it can be beneficial to go through multiple times if you've seen some of these questions before. But anyway, this topic that we're looking at on the screen comes from a resource that's there and that you can use for self-study if you're working on that. Good. And Raphael, I see your question. I'll get to your question in just a moment, okay? Let's take a look here at this question. Describe your favorite season of the year. You should address which season it is, what the weather's like during the season, and what you like to do during the season, and explain why this season is your favorite. All right, I would like to give everybody out there watching 1 minute to think through how you would respond to this question. If you've got a pencil and paper nearby, you could take a moment and think through some notes or write them down. Okay, you don't, for this one right now, you don't need to write anything in the chat. If you want to share what you would like to say on this topic, that's fine. But let's take a minute and just think through what you would do to respond to this question before we look at some sample response and then some notes on a sample response to this, okay? So I'm gonna get, just like I do in Conversation Club, I'm gonna get my little, my phone out as my timer, okay? And you've already had, it's cheating a little bit. You've all had a little more time to think about this than you would on the actual test because I just announced the question. But anyway, let's take a minute. Think through what you respond. I'm gonna be quiet now and give you a minute to think about what you would say for this card. Okay, so go ahead. Okay, that was 1 minute. 1 minute goes by really fast, all right? So you've got some ideas in mind now about how you would respond to this, okay? And Raphael has a good question about, okay, he's thinking through how would we respond? If you look in the chat, his question is there. And he's thinking about how he would respond and thinking about, okay, is it gonna be a problem if I mix information here, right? Because this third bullet point is talking about what I like to do, and the last part here is about why I like the season. Yeah, and so you might need to mix things up a little bit, right? And that's okay. One of the best ways to respond to these topic cards is to respond to these bullets just one by one, okay? And before you get into this longer discussion down below, but yeah, on this one, I could imagine that the reasons, or one of the main reasons you like a particular season is because of the things that you do during that season. So yeah, I think we could mix that up, and that would be okay, because in that answer, we are responding to all of these points on the card. And we're gonna look at that. And actually, the sample responses we take a look at will have a mixture, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment, okay? Okay, and if you mix the third answer with the last one, it won't be very good. Yeah, okay, so yes, we're talking about mixing, sure. We still need to have a focused answer, okay? And even if we do, so one of the things we want to avoid doing is repeating ourselves quite a bit, okay? So we don't want to repeat information. If we talk about things we like to do here, then we don't want to say the exact same things down here. We're gonna have to think about how to do that. So that would be an issue. And so we'll have to think about how to do that. Let's take a look, actually, instead of talking about it theoretically. Oh boy, there's a lot of information on the screen here. Apologies that it's sort of filling everything up. I hope you can see it easily here. But let's look at a sample answer here. Now, this is, look up at the top. This answer is not bad. Okay, the language is pretty good. The person responding here is covering a lot of the things that they should cover, okay? But there are things that can be improved here, okay? And so that's what we're gonna think about here in this next segment is, what can we do to plan an answer that improves upon what we see here in this sample. Okay, so let's take a look. All right. Let me see. How should we do this best? What instead of no, let's see. I'll read it. I'll read it out loud. Okay. There are some folks who can benefit from hearing this out loud. So let me do that here. All right. My favorite season is summer. I like it a lot better than spring, winter, or fall. Actually, fall is my least favorite season. My country is Korea, and we have 4 seasons, including summer. But in summer, in my country, the weather is very different from many other countries. We have a lot of rain, not just California-style sun. But I guess we do have some sunny days. Maybe almost half the days in summer are sunny. In the Korean summer, I like to play a lot of board games when it rains, or do other indoor activities, such as video games or reading. It's sad that it rains so much, though. Luckily, there are some sunny, warm days too, like they have so much in other countries. On those days, I like to go mountain climbing in my hometown of Seoul, or take high-speed rail to Busan and go to Hyundai Beach, which is the most popular beach in South Korea. So yeah, summer's my favorite with mixed weather and varied activities. All right. So there's a lot of good stuff here, but there are some weaknesses as well. Okay, so based on what we've talked about so far, or based on what you know, I'd love to hear, what do you think? You could mention something good that you see here, or you could mention some weaknesses, some things that could be improved, and we can think about those as well. Now, Zainab, I see your hand is raised. Let's use the chat, okay? Instead of unmuting ourselves, let's use the chat for this one. What ideas do you have about how to avoid this? Yeah. Okay, so Raphael, I think you were making a point before about how mixing can avoid repetition. Yeah, and so this person has some repetition, but managed to avoid at least mentioning very specific things multiple times. Okay, so they're avoiding some repetition here, so that's good. If you don't mind, can you share this kind of answer example with Jeremy? What do you mean there? So you want what do you want to be shared? Do you want me to copy and paste this text into like the document that we have? Would that be an idea? Is that what you're asking for? Because I can do that. Yeah. Yes. Okay, good. So I won't do it right now because that's going to mess up my presentation, if that's okay. But I will copy and paste these samples into the document that I shared earlier, so that you can have those. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. So here we go. Some ideas on how to improve this. So I think some information needs to be taken out. Interesting. Good. Aslam, if you can mention what information should be taken out, or anyone can answer that. I agree. Some information should be removed. All right. So go ahead. If you or others see some things that ought to be removed, you can just give me a sense of the sentence or two that you think might not work. Good. No clear mention of why he likes the season. Okay. Good. Yes. So remember, one of our main things we're supposed to talk about is why. Why do we like this? We have a lot of information on what we do, and that's great, and plenty of detail on that. And probably, as we're going to hear from some of you who are working on this now, some information that should not belong in there. But there is a lot of information about what we do, but the why information is not there. Okay, it is really unclear why this is the person's favorite season, other than just to mention that here down below. So we need to work on that. We need to work on that a little bit for this one to be improved. Good. So the second line in the first paragraph is something we could remove. In the summer in my country, the weather, the second line in the first paragraph. I like it a lot better than spring, winter, or fall. Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of unnecessary there. If you say summer is my favorite season, then we don't really need to have this comparative sentence here afterward. That's a good point. Good. Yeah, other people agree with that. So in the second paragraph, another idea of something to remove, my country, Korea. Yeah. So my country is Korea and we have 4 seasons. Yeah. Good. So describe your favorite season of the year. Yeah. This person, all this information about Korea and things like that, it doesn't really necessarily pertain directly to the questions. Good. Good. I like that. Yeah. Other people are agreeing. We don't need the information about what's liked the least. Yeah. If we're looking at this response, again, it's not terrible. It's not bad. There's some good things here that we want to look at. Just want to point out. All right. So our main goal here is to talk about a season. We want to focus on a season, and that's what we need to have our discussion relate to as directly as possible. In our sample response, as all of you are noting, we're getting off into different directions. We're talking about Korea. We're talking about seasons we don't like. There's a lot of extra words in there that don't necessarily help us to answer the questions that are on the screen. Okay, we've got information about what the weather is like, right? We have here in the second paragraph, we have 4 seasons, including summer. But in summer in my country, the weather is very different from many other countries. We have a lot of rain. Okay, that's fine. So we can say the weather is rainy, right? We can say that we don't have a lot of sunny days, okay, but maybe half the days are sunny. We've got a lot of information here, but not very much description about what the weather is like. So wouldn't it be better if we gave just a sentence or two with a little more description, focusing directly on what the weather is like? I don't have a very clear sense of that from this part of this student's speech, right? I get a lot of comparative stuff about, California and some sunny days and whatever, but I want more description, right? So what are some things we could talk about? What kinds of, in the summer months, the temperature usually soars up into whatever, 30 degrees Celsius or whatever you're using where you live. And we have many rainy days and very few sunny days. It's often cloudy during the summer. All right, a very direct response answering that question would be so much better than what we see here, where things are going off into different directions, right? Okay, I think the strongest part of this sample response is what the people like to do, but probably we're getting into too much detail here, especially since this particular student doesn't do very much at all to explain why this season is their favorite, okay? So we need to think about improving this. Now I see notes coming in from everybody around here. Let me see what you've written. Yeah, okay, so some suggestions about organizing the response better. Great, I like that. Yeah, let's take a look at how to organize this response more strategically, better. And you thought about it yourself, how you would respond. So let's take a look at what we could do to improve on the organization, and then we'll look at a much better, more successful response to this question in just a few minutes, okay? So some sample notes here. All right, if we're gonna respond to this question, we need to be strategic. When that first bullet point, you want to respond simply. Instead of going off and talking about whatever, seasons that, compared to seasons you don't like, or all of that extra information that all of you noticed back here that shouldn't be there. We need to be very direct. Okay, so bullet point 1. You want to mention, my favorite season is summer. And if you can paraphrase, that would be even better, right? The best season in my country is summer by far. Okay, something like that, right? And you can use some different language there to answer that question directly. So you can have if you need notes to answer that, you can write it down. Probably that's something you can just keep in your mind, right? You don't necessarily need the notes for this, but we're going to put it on the page just to give you a sense of how to organize things. All right, point 2. All right, remember, the sample response went into all kinds of different things, comparing to like saying things about California and saying things about, half the days are sunny and not sunny or whatever. We need a direct and clear description of what the weather is like. And an appropriate response here would simply be a sentence or two describing the weather and what it's like during the favorite season of the year. So the information we need to include is just information about weather and describing weather. So we need if you're going to write notes for this, if you need them, you would write things like rainy, okay, temperature, warm, okay, and there are some sunny days. This is the essential information you need. And my recommendation would be to not go outside of that information. Respond to the question very directly, and that's enough, okay? So those are the kinds of things you should focus on, and you should not go off into different directions if you can talk about it. Yeah, and I see some examples coming in of some things you would say. Yeah, so Sanjeet, yes. Vibrant blue skies, clear clouds, high temperatures. Those are the things. If you've got some fancy words to describe temperature or in weather, use them here. That would be a nice thing. You know, if the climate is very muggy in the summer, muggy or humid. Muggy is another word for humid. That could be a good kind of thing. The air is crisp. Okay, or the skies are usually blue and bright during the day with very few clouds, right? You can use some descriptive language here. That's going to help you, but you don't need to say a lot. You just need to focus on that prompt and that question. And so your notes should look like that. They should be very focused on exactly how you can respond to that question there, okay? Now we get into the complicated part. And this was, Raphael, your question before about how mixing, we had a good discussion in the chat. Some people saying, you know, how do we mix things if we're going to mix an answer here, if my activities that I like are a reason why? We got to think through how to do this kind of thing. All right, but the third bullet point starts to get a little more, we have more possibilities for detail and example that we're encountering in this particular question that we're answering. Okay, so we have to have an angle here. So what you like to do. All right, so one way to respond here would be to think about, all right, what I like to do kind of depends on what the weather's like at that time, okay? Because there are some sunny days, but it's often rainy. So it would be really maybe a good thing to do to talk about what you like to do on rainy days and what you like to do on sunny days, okay? And again, this doesn't need to be a super long discussion, but you could give some examples of what you like to do, and this would be a nice little way to organize the information a little bit. So on rainy days, you do indoor activities like playing video games or board games, okay? And on sunny days, you go outdoors, you swim, hike, do outdoor sports, right? So again, responding to the question directly. Remember the question, specific question we're supposed to look at here is, what do you like to do during this season? Okay, and you could plan for a couple of details here. That would be a good use of your 1 minute. They're asking you for some examples. So you could write some examples down. Now these notes, the amount of language you see here is probably more than you're going to be able to write on your note card. In a moment, I'll show you a simplified version of these notes, but just thinking through strategically what you would want to say. We need to respond as directly as possible to that question. And so your notes ought to simply have examples and details that relate to exactly that point. And so you could talk about, well, you know, on a rainy day, I do this, and on a sunny day, I do that. And it would be a very appropriate way to respond to this particular bullet point, okay? Now, what we saw from the sample response was a very weak answer to the last part. And this is common. This is something that happens quite a bit. I see this happening in conversation clubs sometimes with students. I also see it on sample responses from students that I encounter now and then. Is we need to then, we can't just say, you know, oh, for all these reasons, you know, this is my favorite season. No, we need to explain and provide some discussion about why the season's your favorite. Okay, so we've described the activities. Now we need to give some reasons why. So your notes should be very focused on it. answering exactly that question. Because this is my favorite season because, and you need to have some ideas, at least one good one, about why this season is your favorite. So an option here would be to say something like, I don't know, the weather is balanced. It's cool, but also hot and sunny. There's a mixture of things here. So there's variety in the weather, but there's some balance. All right, that would make sense based on what we're kind of thinking about that Korea example we read just a moment ago. And so thinking about how it could be organized a little better. That response did not say anything about why. Okay, it simply gave activities and said for these reasons, but there were no real reasons provided. So we need to provide one. And one thing that we could say about that particular answer would be, okay, well, the weather is balanced, and so that provides, that's something I like. All right, you can come up with anything here. There's almost no wrong answer. It has to sound reasonable. It has to make some sense, but there's no wrong answer here for this kind of question. And then here we're thinking about how to use the answers, how to mix these up, because you might face the possibility of needing to repeat yourself. Okay, so we've already talked about all these activities. So we can make the point that, that mixture of activities is something that I really like. Okay, and if we've already described those activities in detail, we don't need to describe them again. The reason is that things are mixed and we can do a wide variety of things, and that would be a good response here. Okay, so let's take a look. Here's an improved response. Here's an improved response to our sample question. So this one's stronger. It's not necessarily perfect. We could still think about improvements, but let's take a look at this one now. I'm going to read it again for the benefit of some folks who have a difficult time seeing things on the screens that you're looking at. I'm aware that affects some of you. So let's just read through. My favorite season is summer. Nice and direct, because of the mix and the mix of weather and activities I can do. Oh, nice. Okay, so we're already providing sort of an idea of why this is the favorite season. You don't have to do this, but this is a nice thing to do, because this gives the sense of where you're headed in your speech. Okay, it's almost like a thesis statement. You don't need to do this, but if you can insert a little bit of an answer at the beginning that pertains to the last part of the card, the last feature there, by all means, you can do that, and that can be a nice thing to do to give your speech a little bit of extra organization. Okay. In my country, South Korea, the summers are rainy, very warm, and between those wet days, we get some nice, sunny, warm days too. Do you see how much clearer that bullet point is being answered here? It's direct. It's not a lot of information, but it is direct and clear response to that bullet point. And that's what your goal ought to be for this. Again, some students wonder about the length of these things. Not long here for these bullet points, just direct and clear and with detailed language as much as you possibly can. The things I like to do. Okay, so now we're on to the things I like to do piece of it, right? Because we've already talked about the first two bullet points. I won't go back. You're familiar with the question already. Now we're on to this point about what we do. The things I like to do in the summer. Now this student chose to spend more time describing these activities, and that's fine. As we've all recognized, this particular bullet point could be a good place to talk with a little more depth, because we're asked for a few different examples of things to do. And then we just need to make sure we're not repeating ourselves later on. There are other types of cards where you're going to maybe not go into as much depth on the third bullet point, but then you're going to have to go into more depth in the last part. So you'll have to be thinking on your feet a little bit as you go to this. This particular response goes into some depth about the third bullet point. The things I like to do in the summer really depend on the weather. My rainy day activities include video games, board games, watching TV, Most importantly, though, I love to spend rainy summer days inside with my family. When it's sunny, though, that's the time I get out into the world, either alone or with others. I go hiking and swimming at the beach, and I love to play outdoors. All right. So this person chose to organize information on rainy and sunny days kind of way, and they provided some nice details there. Okay. So compared to the response before, we've got a very direct list of activities, and it's even got a little bit of a sense of organization about like, hey, there are two types here of things that I really like to do. And this is great. This is a very clear way of explaining the information. And now this person needs to explain why the season's their favorite without having to repeat these kinds of things specifically. Okay, so let's see what they did. So I guess summer is my favorite season because it's a season that offers me so much variety. Okay, I get those hot, dry days where I can be outside being active, but I also like nice rainy days. Oops, sorry, there's a typo there. That are cool and clear. Oh boy, typo. Like nice rainy days with cool and where the air is cool and clear while I stay in. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll fix that on here. Apologies for the typo. Varied weather and activities means I never get bored. Okay, so here, instead of repeating about all of these activities, we see the reasons why. All right, so we had some nice detail up here. We don't have time and we don't need to add a lot of those details down below in this section because they've already been mentioned there. We've just got very clear reasons why the season is this person's favorite. And it's a nice response. It's certainly much stronger than the other one that we saw a moment ago. So what do you think? What do you think about this one? If there are weak points other than the typo that I have in there that I'm going to fix, I apologize for that. What do you notice? What do you like about this one, or are there things you think could be improved, or do you have questions about it? What do you notice here? Raphael, I'm not. Let's see. I'm not quite sure your question, Raphael, about partially answering from the get-go. I'm not, can you clarify that one? I'm not sure. Well, at least the last one doesn't have typos. Yes, thank you, good. Yeah, I'll fix that, I apologize. The first paragraph, my favorite season because the mix of weather and activities I can do. From the get, you mean, I was confused. A gecko is an animal. You mean from the get-go. You mean from a gecko is a little lizard. That's why I was confused. I didn't remember talking about a gecko. But from the get-go, yes, it's optional. I think it's a good. I like it here. I think this person was able to respond by including where they're headed with that last question at the end. And I think that can be a good thing to try to do. You don't necessarily have to do it, but it does give a nice framework for your answer. And so it can be, if you can do it, and if you can think about what you want to say for that last part, it can be a really good thing to add right at the beginning of your discussion. Yeah. Good. Let's see. You get a much better sense of getting the response that addresses the points clearly on the topic card. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I agree, Aslam. The second paragraph, first line, very warm, very rainy. Yeah. So Kamal, I'm not quite sure what your point is. Oh, it's confusing to you. Let's see. In my country, South Korea, the summers are very rainy, but very warm. Yeah, well, there's a lot of rain, but it's also, it can be quite hot. And so, yeah, we could probably find some good weather-related vocabulary to describe that kind of thing when it's hot and rainy. Actually, we talked about it before, being humid, being muggy, having high humidity. It's almost like you walk out the door and your shirt is already wet from the hot and wet air that you're feeling. Yeah, I think that's what they're talking about in this situation. Okay. All right, Raphael, I'm sorry. I haven't heard that phrase before. If you've heard it before, great. I apologize. It caught me off there. Good. Okay, great. So we can all see this response is improved. This response is much better than the one before. Again, I will copy and paste this onto your resource sheet that I've shared already for you so that you can have this example to look at. Okay, so we had some example notes from before, all right? And just want to show you here that, as I mentioned a moment ago, this is a lot of language to include in 1 minute. And so this was to give you a sense of the way to respond to these questions directly in notes that you would take during your 1 minute. But probably realistically, this is actually the amount of information you could realistically expect to put on your card or on your note page within 1 minute, right? We don't have very much time to do this. So you want to gain practice and gain skill at writing notes really quickly and efficiently, and ones that are going to help remind you of what you plan to say during your response. And so a good example of that kind of looks like this, right? So this person's going to talk about summer, sunny, rainy days, activities. They like indoor games with family, outdoor activities was the other one they talked about. And then especially thinking of these 2 reasons here and writing them down in your notes. This is often what I advise many students to focus on very specifically, is that last question, making sure you have something to say for that. And so this, the ideas, the concepts broken out are longer here. If you can add any of this extra information, great. But probably realistically, this is the amount of information you're going to be able to include within your 1 minute there. Okay, so remember, writing simple versus complicated notes, right? So we want to keep it simple. It depends. If you can write more, if you can get it on there, that's great. That obviously is going to depend on how quickly you write. Okay, but remember what we talked about earlier. You don't want to have so much information on your topic card that you're reading from it throughout. You need to be trying to focus on your fluency and speak from your mind as much as possible. And so sometimes having more language on the page can actually be a distraction. So work on this, practice this. As we talked about, one of the students earlier said, maybe I don't need notes. Practice that. It's good to practice these things and to see which approach is going to allow you to speak the most fluently and the most clearly, okay? And for some students, that's just gonna mean looking at the topic card and not writing notes and not speaking from written language, but actually just responding from their mind. And that's a possibility that could be the most effective for you, okay? So, but I think the most likely scenario is that most of you will come up with a strategy where you'll have some notes, you'll have notes that work for you as reminders, but they're probably going to be in between the sort of simple example and the complex example that we saw just a moment ago. Practice it. Practice this a lot. Practice looking at questions. Remember, we've got those sample questions that in that resource I shared a moment ago. You want to practice, even if you're not fully going through the act of giving the speech, which I don't know why you wouldn't. It's only a 1 to 2 minute thing, but practicing organizing responses is a really good thing to do, and noticing what amount of detail you're capable of putting into your notes and how much detail you need in order to respond really effectively. Okay. Okay, we can skip over that. All right. So to finish out for today, let's think about this last one here. We're about at time, but we can go over for just a little bit today. I'd love to finish with one final activity here, thinking about a very specific question. Okay, so let's take a minute. Everybody, let's take another minute here. I'd love to hear what you have, what kind of notes you would come up with for this one, and what you would include and how you would organize them. So it's a little tough to put some of these things in the chat, but you can try. Let's take a minute and just write down what you would plan to say. I'm probably going to look much more similar to our sort of simple notes that we took just a moment ago, but I'd love to see how you would think through responding to this particular prompt on the page. Okay, so let's take a minute here. I'll get my timer back out. And let's pretend like we're at the actual speaking test here. So for this question, I'd like for you to describe something you usually do at the beginning of the day. Okay, you've got 1 minute to prepare your answer, and you'll speak for 1 to 2 minutes. Okay, so plan what you would say. Come up with your notes, and if you can, put them in the chat, and let me see what you would plan to say for this particular question. Okay, your 1 minute starts now. Go ahead and try. Okay, that was 1 minute. All right, I'll give you another minute or so. If you can type up, the things you would like to say to this prompt, go ahead and put them in the chat. You can put notes. If you have more to say, you can put it there. But I'll give you another minute, minute and a half here, and I'd love to see some ideas that you have to respond to this one. And this is also something you can share with your classmates. Okay, go ahead. I'll be quiet here. I see some responses coming in. That's great. Give you some more time. I'm noticing some things here, some choices people are making about the topics that they choose. I see, you know, from one person talking about having breakfast and getting showered. That's good, and that fits one part of this question really well. I'd be worried about that choice in describing, in talking about some of the other questions here about how important it is. I mean, I guess taking a shower and eating breakfast is extremely important, but you might run out of things to say. Others are talking about things like exercise and taking a walk. Okay, even if it's not necessarily true that you do those kinds of things in the morning, that could be a good thing to talk about, because there are many things you can talk about in terms of reasons why you do that, and that could be a good strategic choice there, right? I'm seeing folks talking about meditation and yoga. Yeah, morning walks, going into nature. Good, good. I like this. Those feel like really good topic choices because you're going to have lots to say about them. Going to the gym, I see. Yeah, Sid. Good. Let me take a look here. I'm going to look now specifically at some of the notes here. Okay, so good. Good. I'm seeing some really clear notes. If you're looking in the chat yourself here, folks, Yeah, I'm looking at Raphael's response here now. Raphael mentions yoga and why you do it, feeling good and having more mental clarity and flexibility. Good. All right. How important it is. It's important in a religious way. Okay, good. So there is a spiritual meaning to the activity that Raphael could talk about there. Good, clear, direct response to that third bullet point. And then planning for a reason why. And a reason why, because it's a good time for consistent practice. Okay, it's part of a routine that you begin in the morning before other things in your day start to get in your way and influence what you're going to do throughout the day. Nice, really clear, focused notes there. Good, I'm seeing some others come in. Great, 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 great. Yeah, good. And I'm seeing people with kind of an appropriate amount of information as well. This is great. The point for us today is to think through how to take these cards and get a very clear kind of template or process by which we expect to take in this card, this information, the expectations that are on this card, and have a very consistent plan for how we approach our responses to these questions. Okay, I hope you were able to gather some of the key pieces of this, which are, you want to paraphrase language from the question card. Okay, that goes for all IELTS questions, for writing, for speaking. We don't want to repeat language as much as possible. I mentioned that earlier. Didn't make a big point about it, but then also, of course, we need to be really direct. We need to make sure our responses don't go off into different directions. And we need to make sure we respond completely to each of the prompts that we see on this card. For some of the bullet points and the topics that we see here, the response can be very simple. One quick sentence will get you to the end, right? And so what do? I practice yoga every morning. Would be fine. That would be enough. But then some of these other ones, we need to think about responding directly with just a little bit more detail and explanation there. And then we cannot forget about this last part. It cannot be like that example prompt we saw earlier in the lesson, the one with problems where you just kind of very quickly at the end kind of summarize things with a response to that question. You need to plan for and think through reasons, and if possible, giving explanation for those reasons or whatever they're asking you to provide in that last prompt. And this is part of the habit you form around responding to these questions. And it takes practice, but after time, you get a good feel for this and you can do it almost automatically. Okay, so this is something, again, for all of you Magoosh students there, this is something that we can continue to focus on and practice, especially in the conversation club. If you're coming to those, we're thinking about these types of things, and these are approaches you can use in order to respond very completely and fully with your answers. And the practice, as much as understanding the concepts, and these are concepts you can also get from our blog posts that we have and from lessons that we have. These concepts, understanding them is one thing, putting them into practice is another. They're two separate things. And it's not enough just to understand what to do. You need to train yourself and your brain and your ability to do these kinds of things fluently and in a short amount of time. And so the practice side of it is equally important as you're trying to prepare for test day. Okay. All right. So we are over time here. I don't have a lot of time here at the end to respond to questions, but we've been I've been taking questions as we go. So hopefully you got your question answered. I am going to post the recording of this lesson on your dashboard. As always, I'm going to add the sample responses to the notes so that you can have those, and I'll correct that little typo I had in there. Apologies for that. So you all can expect that later today. It should be there in about an hour or two. I'll put that information out there for you. Okay. One last thing today. You students who have been coming to a lot of these sessions, you've seen me do this a lot, and this is going to be something that is
maybe you're already expecting what I'm about to say, but these classes are new to us, and I am working really hard to try to make sure that they are as useful and as good as they can possibly be. And I think we're off to a good start, but I think there are ways where I want to know what all of you are really liking about these classes, like the one we had today, and things that if you can think of things that you would like to see differently or ideas for the future, I would love to know those things, because I'm really working hard. This is our first time through all of these lessons, and I want to go through and make improvements as we go. Okay, so those of you who have been in my classes already, you know that I like to do surveys. Okay, and I would really, really, really appreciate it if you would take just a couple of minutes after today's class. And I'm just gonna, this is for all of you at Magoosh. You out there on YouTube, I'm not gonna send this your way, but I would love, I put in the chat a link to a survey, and I would really appreciate it if you would take some time. Now, this is the similar survey. If you've gone to Conversation Club, I've asked for, the survey looks almost the same, but what I want information about is about these sort of webinar style classes. Okay, so I'm thinking about them differently here. So if you've already filled one of these out for Conversation Club, please consider filling another one out for me. Okay, I would really appreciate that. And if you've already filled one of these out before for a webinar style class, that's okay. If you've got new things to add, you could fill it out again. Or if you don't have any new things to say, you can just ignore it. That's okay. I appreciate that you've already answered. Okay. So anyway, I've said a lot here about it. I really appreciate if you take 5 minutes and just fill it out. Okay. All right. Good. So I want to say I'm going to have to sign off for now. I hope to see many of you folks at Conversation Club tomorrow. One announcement is, and I announced this in a different class earlier in the week, but next week is on Monday is a holiday in the United States. It is called Labor Day. And so next week on Monday, we will not have Conversation Club because of the holiday, and people will be off that day. So if you're looking at your calendar, you'll notice there's nothing for Monday next week, and that's because of the holiday that we have. Okay. Good. All right, everybody. I've got to sign off here. I hope to see you soon, and thank you all for coming today, and have a wonderful day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and we'll see you soon. Okay. Bye, folks.